But when the glucose goes up in the blood, fructose starts to be produced in the brain. And this has even been shown by a group at Yale in humans that if you raise blood glucose, fructose levels go up in the brain in humans after about 40 minutes. And it's very significant. And we found that high glycemic carbs and salty foods, salt actually triggers that reaction of glucose to fructose. So there are these foods that we eat that can generate fructose. And when it goes up in the brain as well as in other tissues. So this led me to think, well, perhaps what's going on is we're eating foods that are raising fructose levels in the brain. And then I started looking at it and I realized that there are all these data that show that, sugar intake is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. It's a risk factor for cerebral atrophy. High glycemic carbs are a risk factor. Salty foods are a risk factor. All the things that generate fructose are risk factors for Alzheimer's, and obesity and diabetes, which are, signatures for fructose production or intake. They also are risk factors. So then we had this connection between the risk factors for Alzheimer's are the same risk factors for raising fructose in the brain. Alzheimer's affects the areas of the brain that are inhibited by fructose, and the areas that are stimulated by fructose are preserved. So like the occipital cortex, so that you can see the food, it's not affected very much in Alzheimer's. The anterior cingulate, which drives the foraging, that's not really affected in Alzheimer's. But the cerebral cortex, the hippocampus, the entorhinal cortex, all these different areas that are inhibited by fructose are actually the signature of where it occurs. And it's the same areas where insulin resistance occurs. To kind of wrap our hypothesis together, basically, if you give sugar to animals, which has fructose in it, after about 8 weeks, they have trouble walking through a maze. They have, normally they can get through a maze, and as the more times they go through it, the faster they go. If you give them fructose, when they go through the maze, they don't get faster. They continue to have trouble getting through the maze. Then, if you look in their brains, you find insulin resistance, you find mitochondrial dysfunction, you find a drop in BDNF, your nerve growth factor, you find a drop in ATP, mitochondrial dysfunction. It is exactly what we're talking about. And then if you go out to 16 weeks, they actually start developing amyloid plaques and tau protein. Drop in ATP is probably the key issue driving Alzheimer's. And there's only one nutrient. There's only one nutrient that lowers ATP in the cell, and that's fructose. And fructose levels are high in patients with Alzheimer's, 5 to 6-fold higher than in normal age-matched controls. It's amazing how complicated fructose is, but how it all leads in excess leads to morbidity. And, as we get towards the end of the hour, it's really fun talking to you about how we can learn more and more about what fructose does and how it probably has roles in not just obesity and metabolic syndrome, but neurologic diseases and ADHD and bipolar disease and Alzheimer's and seizures and GI illnesses and anaphylaxis. It's such a major driver. It's a big animal. Fructose is a big animal that does a lot of things to a lot of systems. I know you have this interest in fructose and cancer and fructose and alcoholism, and we've also linked fructose as driving the Warburg effect, for example, which is fructose is the perfect fuel for cancer cells, and fructose is involved in alcoholism too. So, we need to have another session to dive in more, but because it's sort of scary. When I started seeing that fructose could be involved in so many processes, I looked in the mirror. I said, am I tricking myself? There's like too many diseases that fructose is important in. And then, but then you do the studies and you block it or whatever, and it it seems like it's more like we've discovered a really important pathway. And I think the reason is because fructose is the only nutrient that lowers the energy in a cell. Most foods, when you eat it, you increase the ATP and the excess can go into fat. In fructose, you drop the ATP, so the energy that comes in go to maintain energy balance goes into the fat directly. And so you maintain a low ATP but high fat program. And that's what people with metabolic syndrome have. That's what people with diabetes have. That's what people with Alzheimer's have, And so we're looking at a signature.